I'm John Heilemann.
And I'm Mark Halperin. And with all due respect to Reince Priebus, if you let Donald Trump pick the chairman of your convention in Ohio, remember, he's got options.
Paul O'Neill of the Yankees. Come, stand up, Paul. Paul. In fact, Paul, you originally come from Ohio, right? Oh, wow. Paul O'Neill of the Yankees.
On the show tonight, Jeff Daniels axed Guy Cecil super PACs. But first, the love that Trump lacks. In just 3 days, Donald J. Trump, billionaire, plans to jet down to Washington, D.C. to meet with his GOP unity not yet BFF, House Speaker Paul Ryan. In an interview with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel today, Ryan again said he was not yet ready to back Trump, adding, quote, "I never said never. I just said at this point I wish I had more time to get to know him before this happened." When asked what he would do if Trump asked him to step down as chair of the Republican conclave in Cleveland this summer, Ryan added this: "He's the nominee. I'll do whatever he wants with respect to the convention." Today, Trump announced that Chris Christie would head up his transition team. And over the weekend, the presumptive Republican nominee continued to add more names to the Trump train manifest without doing very much to publicly court people to get on board.
It's just more drama, but I think it's a mistake not to do this. We want to bring the party together. Does the party have to be together? Does it have to be unified? I'm very different than everybody else, perhaps, that's ever run for office. I actually don't think so. I think that...
It doesn't have to be unified?
No, I don't think so. I think it would be better if it were unified. I think it would be, there would be something good about it, but I don't think it actually has to be unified in the traditional sense.
So, John, is Trump right? Does the party not need to be unified in the traditional sense? Does he need Paul Ryan and other wavering Republicans to win this thing?
I'll remind you of a piece of electoral fact of which you're fully aware. Republicans have lost 5 of the last 6 popular votes in the presidential election. The Republican Party starts way behind. I think Donald Trump needs every Republican. He needs all the unity he can get if he's going to overcome the huge electoral college and other advantages Hillary Clinton has going into the general election that any Republican would face with any Democrat. You need unity.
Yeah, he's not going to have full unity, right? He's never going to get the Bushes. Right. He's never going to get Mitt Romney. There's a number of other slightly less but still prominent Republicans. So he's not going to have full unity. He needs, I think, to make a virtue of the fact that he's basically can say, which is the truth on some level, I'm supporting stuff that they don't like, and therefore they're not going to support me. Now, that's not the only reason they're not. But I think he can get by with less than full unity because in the end, Paul Ryan, whether he endorses him or not, is going to be for him.
Well, I agree that there's an advantage to being the outsider. There's an advantage to being the anti-establishment, rhetorically speaking. But again, there's a reason why Paul Ryan is the most powerful, highest placed Republican in the country right now, elected official. And a lot of these other people do represent, it's not that their endorsement matters in terms of moving votes, but there are people who look to them as this person signals whether this guy is a legit contender or not. And when there are people backing away from Trump, it just doesn't help him. He needs all the votes he can get.
Here's part of why he does need everything. When this campaign's over, the Trump campaign is going to reveal just how far behind they were in doing all the mechanical things you need to do. We know they're far behind. They're even further behind than people realize. That means that you cannot, if you don't have the support of the groups like people like Paul Ryan, you have to build networks, fundraising, organizational efforts by yourself. Trump needs help. The campaign cannot build it on their own.
Right. This is not a campaign that comes in with a fully built-out general election campaign.
So I
need
think
to outsource some of that.
Symbolically, it's not that bad, but substantively, organization-wise,
practically
really important
on the ground. I agree with that. Okay. Donald J. Trump, businessman, has been cashing in his 2 cents about the economy lately. After taking the position last year that a low minimum wage is not bad for the country, Trump is now saying that he wants to see it raised, but would leave the decision up to the states. On taxes, he's changed his tune a little by saying that his proposal from September was only an opening bid that could be negotiated, and that while rich people will still see lower taxes, they will probably end up paying more than he originally proposed. The Donald has also drawn criticism, and some pretty harsh criticism, for his comments on the nation's borrowing habits. First, he said last week that he was open to the idea of, quote, renegotiating the country's debt. And today he told CNN that the U.S. government will, quote, never have to default because you print the money, end quote. Today on a press call with reporters, former White House National Economic Advisor Gene Sperling and Jake Sullivan from the Clinton campaign added these warnings to the Trump econ pylon.
This is the most risky, reckless, and regressive
tax proposal ever put forward by a major presidential candidate.
His plan hands trillions in tax breaks to millionaires and corporations, blows a massive hole in the federal budget, and even puts Social Security and Medicare at risk.
So, Mark, as Trump shifts around, moves around, slides around, engages in some of this rhetoric that's a little loose, is he playing with fire on economic and business-related issues?
I think he is. I am one who early on said that Trump could get away with shifting positions, with taking positions that weren't in the strict orthodoxy of the party. I still think he can on some issues. He cannot on the economy. I don't believe he can win this election unless more Americans think he will be a good steward of a good economy than they do about Hillary Clinton. He is alienating people on the right and left, but more important to me, he's alienating, for his purposes, he's alienating people in the business community who will look at Hillary Clinton and say, I may think she's too liberal, but she's at least more stable.
Yeah, and look, I mean, Trump has a lot of glaring weaknesses as a general election candidate. But the one thing that he somehow has, to this point, been able to avoid is the Romneyization of Donald Trump. His tax plan, given that he's a billionaire, giving Democrats easy ammunition to paint him as being just another Mitt Romney, another rich guy who's out for rich people and doesn't care about working people, doesn't care about all these people who are frustrated, alienated about the state of the economy. That could be on its own enough to cost him the election.
So he gets that. So he tries to move to the left on his tax plan and says that maybe not cut taxes as much for the rich. That's fine. But he's got to explain these things, not in tweets, not on voice-only interviews. He has to look the country in the eye and say, I get the economy. I think the reason is immigration policies, his trade policies have been so potent is because people are worried about the economy. They want change in the economy, but they also want someone who's not going to make it up on the fly.
Yeah, and there's a sense, again, with Trump, I agree with you. I mean, business is a problem, but I actually just think it's all a problem because, again, you got to have some stability. This is why I think Trump is so wrong about the notion that unpredictability is a virtue, whether it's in foreign affairs or domestic affairs.
I think the country could take it on foreign affairs sometimes, not on the economy. All right, the stakes are getting higher and more personal in the general election poker match between Donald J. Trump and Hillary Clinton. Over the past few days, in response to news that Clinton is getting ready for battle, Trump upped the ante on his woman card criticism with a string of attacks against Clinton that also frequently mentioned her husband, former President Bill Clinton. Take a look at part of the collection our friends over at MSNBC's Morning Joe put together.
Hillary Clinton just ordered $90 million worth of hit ads on Donald Trump. And it's hit ads on Donald Trump and women.
In the history of politics, Hillary Clinton's husband abused women more than any man that we know of in the history of politics, right?
I mean, have you ever read what Hillary Clinton did to the women that Bill Clinton had affairs with? Do you remember the famous, I did not have sex with that woman, and then a couple of months later, I'm guilty?
All right, so the Clinton campaign has not engaged directly in all those things Trump said. They put out a statement in the name of a spokesperson, basically changing the subject and pointing to some things that Trump said unrelated. John, if Team Clinton continues to turn the other cheek, what is it going to take for Trump to actually break through with these attacks on Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton regarding his personal life?
I believe it is virtually impossible for Trump to break through with these attacks unless the Clinton campaign starts to get rattled by them and starts to react to them in ways that create more openings. Because I do think that, again, you know, for most Americans, Bill Clinton's behavior with respect to women, deplorable as it was in some cases, is priced into the stock on the Clintons. People who hate the Clintons think that about Bill Clinton. A lot of other people, it's old news.
Here's what I think it's going to take. It's going to take the Trump campaign doing a stunt. I say stunt. The Trump campaign doing something unorthodox and new. Maybe having one of the women appear at a press conference, whatever it is, that is so out there that a reporter asked the Clintons about it. I think it's going to take a reporter ask. I don't think a reporter will ask unless they're basically forced to.
Right.
The right wing will egg reporters on. And eventually, I think one or both of the Clintons will be asked, and that could be a game changer.
Well, and also, in the same vein, some new information, some more recent information, some fact on the ground that we're not familiar with.
It's still
talking about Juanita Broderick, talking about Kathleen Willey, talking about Monica Lewinsky, not going to do it.
I think even a new fact, the Clintons would have to be asked directly about it for
I agree.
breakthrough.
I agree, but that would be a potentially potent destabilizing combination.
Yes.
Because the press would be induced to ask about a new fact in the way they're not going to go back and relitigate Kathleen Willey and Juanita Broderick.
And Trump thinks he knows some new facts, by the way.
He does. All right. When we come back, assessing Donald Trump's general election strength and weaknesses. It's surprising to see who is saying what about those factors. We'll explore all of it after these words from our sponsors. you are watching the Trump train barreling down, you'll see that there are currently two tracks of thought about how the presumptive nominee will fare as a general election candidate. On the one side, the usually more liberal Washington Post editorial page editor Fred Hyatt wrote on Sunday that Democrats should fear Trump in a general election, writing, quote, "We don't want to hear your certainty about his November defeat, nor is it reassuring to read how happy the Clinton camp must be to be facing such a weak opponent. They need to be running scared, smart but scared, now and for the next 6 months. When 2/3 of the country is unhappy, a rational outcome can't be taken for granted," end quote. Now, in a strange role switcheroo, reversal, something, it was the Wall Street Journal editorial board who took the other side of this argument, saying that Trump's campaign will implode unless he changes his act and does so quickly. So writing today, the Wall Street Journal editorial board, quote, "If Mr. Trump really wants to be president, as opposed to losing as a populist martyr, he's got to build a broader coalition. Time is more fleeting than he seems to think. If he doesn't act more like a genuine leader soon, he may find that his candidacy has imploded before he's even nominated." So, Mark, how important? Well, let's just talk about these two stories. It's interesting, right? That you have such diversity of opinion, smart people from the left who seem to be kind of scared of Trump, or at least casting this or warning, and then obviously people on the right at the Wall Street editorial board who are castigating him. Just talk a little bit about the ways in which the assessments seem to cross ideological lines or not predictable.
If you look at both the snapshot of where we are and the last 6 presidential elections and the Democrats' domination of the Electoral College and the demographics, you'd say Trump maybe not that he can't win, but that'd be really, really hard. It seems to me the people like Fred Hyatt, who are saying worry about Trump winning or Trump could win, are basically making two judgments. One is that Trump has like the magic, that Trump is going to defy convention again and build a coalition that nobody can currently see in the data. And second, that Hillary Clinton is such a fundamentally flawed candidate that as long as Trump represents change and she represents more of the same, that somehow Trump's going to win.
This is like, to me, part of this is an argument, and I guess maybe a slightly just different way of saying sort of what you just said. It's an argument on some level between like art versus science, right? Because the scientists really basically believe, if you look at the demographics, you look at the Electoral College, you look at things we talked about earlier in the show, Democrats having all those built-in advantages, that Trump is facing a huge uphill fight. And then the art people who basically say, man, this year is so crazy that this guy's just kind of somehow capture lightning in a bottle. Anything can happen. And I think that those people are also informed in many cases by having been wildly wrong about Trump for a year, when they all said he'll never win the Republican nomination. I think many of the people now who are saying that Trump, you should look out because he could be a strong general election candidate, are like a little burned by having been too certain about his weakness as a nomination candidate.
Yeah. We always look at the end of a campaign and the winning side is called heroes and geniuses. Right. You cannot imagine the gap currently between the number of employees in Brooklyn for Clinton and the number of employees for Trump here around the country, thought about who's going to run the battleground states, thought about how to raise money. They're so far ahead. Opposition research, they're so far ahead that Trump has just a whole other layer of disadvantage here that I think, candidates matter most, message matters most, but that stuff's going to matter if Trump doesn't get it together soon.
And the money. All right, coming up, Paul Ryan, Donald Trump, and the battle for the hearts and minds of the Republican Party with two of the best reporters in the biz. We will be right back with them.
We've been talking about Donald J. Trump's great GOP unification challenge and one of his latest pickups. For context, here's a clip from The Circus, our Showtime show in conjunction with Bloomberg Politics, from an episode that aired in early March.
And I think everyone's kind of buying into this he's inevitable and that he can't be stopped. I believe he can be stopped.
What are you doing or plan to do to stop him? He's working with Katie.
Yeah, exactly.
What are you doing?
We're working on it.
All right, so that was Ed Goaz a couple months ago. Here's what the same Republican pollster and strategist said on Fox News this weekend.
You still anti-Trump?
Well, no, I'm going to support the nominee, Judge.
Are you going to support Trump?
I'm going to support the nominee, and Trump is the nominee.
Wait a minute. Are you saying that there's a possibility Trump will not be the nominee?
No, not at all. I am supporting the nominee. Trump, I believe, will be the nominee at this point.
So joining us now to discuss how things are shaping up for Trump and Clinton in the general election, our colleague from Bloomberg View, the great Al Hunt, who's in our Washington bureau, and Karen Tumulty of the Washington Post, who is in her paper's newsroom. So you guys both know Ed Goaz. Al, start with you. He went from being an employee and strategist in the Stop Trump movement to now being for Trump. Is there symbolism there?
No, it's called getting on a train that's left the station. But you could see how uncomfortable he was when he said it. I don't think he believed it. He probably had his fingers crossed.
Karen Tumulty, do you look at that as at all significant, or just one of many for and against Trump at this point?
Well, I sort of love this formulation, and we're hearing it not just from him, but a lot of other Republicans. I will support the nominee. It's sort of like Voldemort in Harry Potter, you know, he who must not be named. You know, I think at this point, I think all of these men and women thought that they were going to have some weeks to sort of get used to the idea and, you know, try it on, see if it fits, of having Trump as their standard bearer. Then we had this incredible, you know, turn of events between last Tuesday and last Thursday. And, you know, I think for a lot of them, it's just that it's hit so quickly that they just haven't gotten their heads around it yet.
Al, let me ask you just a question about money in Trump, right? You know, last week as Trump started to put together his announced he wasn't going to fully self-fund, he was going to raise money, there's probably going to be super PAC money, going to do the party. The question was, who's going to do this stuff? Anthony Scaramucci today comes out and says he's going to help Trump raise money. The billionaire Stan Hubbard, who was formerly an anti-Trump donor, now says he's going to raise money for Trump. Is Trump going to ultimately be able to make the nut on the finance side, or is this going to be maybe his biggest obstacle?
Oh, I think it'll be a hurdle, but he'll make most of it, John. But let me turn to what I think is a more serious money question, namely his tax comments this weekend. And I hate to correct John Heilemann, but he didn't change a little. That was a massive overhaul. What he said was that the rich would pay a little bit more. His proposal, 35% of his tax cut goes to the top 1%. 1.3 million to the top 1/10 of 1%. Now, in a $4 trillion change, he says they won't, and that's because Donald Trump, I think, has no idea, nor does he care what's in his tax plan. Now, why does that matter? Because people like Paul Ryan, who do have principles, you can agree or disagree with them, say this guy doesn't believe in a thing. And I think ultimately, not now, but ultimately, that's going to hurt him a great deal. I think what he did this weekend was really rather stunning.
Karen, is there anything the Trump campaign has done since Trump became the presumptive nominee that you think worries the Clinton campaign?
I do think that the attacks sort of on Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton sort of just coming so relentlessly and from every conceivable direction. When you talk to Democrats, they say that is really what worries them the most about Donald Trump. Most of them don't think he can win, but they just think that they are looking forward to a bunch of months of just sort of constantly being off balance and just never knowing what direction these attacks are going to come from.
Karen, let me just stay with you and ask you this question about the Paul Ryan meeting that's coming up this week with Trump. I mean, what is it? There seem to be two schools of thought. One is that, you know, this is all just sound and fury, signifying nothing, and eventually they're going to end up on the same page with Ryan behind Trump. Others who think this is a really, really deep rift that will never be healed. On the basis of your reporting, which do you think is closer to the truth?
You know, if I had to predict, and my predictions have been worth pretty much nothing this whole year, but I mean, I do think that they both are going to feel a lot of motivation to move to somewhere close to the same spot. But the fact is, this is a struggle not over, you know, one political calculation. It is over what it means to be a Republican and who speaks for the Republican Party. And Paul Ryan is not only asserting himself and his own ideas, but sort of the institutional prerogatives of a Congress where Republicans have their strongest majorities since 1928.
Al, if
can I weigh in on that?
Sure.
Because I think Karen's right. I think the answer is both. They will come out at some point, and they'll, you know, it'll be a come-by-eye moment, and they'll be together. But the differences are profound. They won't go away. They are profoundly different on trade, on immigration, now on tax policies. Those aren't things you can easily paper over, though Paul Ryan will undoubtedly endorse Donald Trump.
Ryan, Al, if Ryan never full-throatedly endorses him, if it's pro forma and it's clear that's not that enthusiastic, in what kind of price and with whom would he pay? Except Trump
Paul
himself.
Ryan?
Yeah.
I think, Paul, listen, the House Republicans desperately needed Paul Ryan. That's why they turned to him. A lot of them, the opposition to Trump is not just coming from so-called establishment Republicans. It's coming from a lot of movement conservatives who think he doesn't believe in anything. It's coming from a whole lot of people who say, I may go along with him, but he's eminently unqualified for the office. I don't think it's going to cost Paul Ryan much of anything. I can't believe he's going to have any kind of a primary, particularly now that Sarah Palin has endorsed his opponent.
Karen, let me ask you this.
But one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, one thing you are hearing, though, is really sort of sober and sensible Republicans talking for the first time as though losing the House is a real possibility.
Yeah.
And, I think that, if it does turn into that kind of cataclysm in the fall, Paul Ryan has a lot to lose.
Right. Let me ask you, Al. You wrote.
I agree.
You have a new column, Al, your Bloomberg View column out this week, which basically says, "Man, this is going to be an ugly, ugly general election." You talk about Roger Stone. You talk about David Brock. Just what's your thesis about about how this is shaping up and what that ugliness portends?
Well, I think it is going to be a race to the bottom. And to go to Karen's earlier observation about what Democrats fear is that I think most Democrats, and she would agree, are confident that Hillary Clinton's going to win this election. But if he has that kind of ugly race, and I don't expect presidential races to be Kennedy School forums, but they ought to discuss an agenda, differences, have a genuine debate. If instead it's all this personal invective, I think even if Hillary Clinton wins by double digits, it's going to make governing almost impossible. And I don't think she'll come in saying, boy, guess what? I won on an idea of where we're going to move America. She won because the other guy people thought was a bum.
Karen, we have dribs and drabs coming in every day, a handful of people either coming out for Trump or saying they're not for Trump or they're not going to the convention. Which ones who haven't declared yet do you have your eyes most on?
Oh, boy. At this point, I think the place to look is the United States Senate, and specifically these people who are in difficult spots in the fall. Don't forget there are 5 seats up for re-elections held by Republicans where Barack Obama won that state by more than 5 percentage points in 2012. Those are going to be the people under the very most pressure.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Karen and Al, thank you both very much for coming in.
Thanks a lot.
Up next, Guy Cecil from the super PAC that backs Hillary Clinton. We'll talk about his general election game plan and where Clinton and Trump stand in his view after this quick break.
When it comes to general election, who has 2 thumbs and is already reserved a purported $91 million in TV ad time? This guy. That is Guy Cecil, co-chair and senior strategist for Priorities USA, a pro-Hillary Clinton super PAC. Thank you, Guy, for coming back on the show and for
Moneybag Cecil.
Is that it?
And for acknowledging your previous appearances on the show have been filled with lies. So we're going to try to break that today and just speak the truth. Looking at the way Republicans ran against Donald Trump, what have you learned from what worked? Not much, but more precisely, what didn't work?
Well, ignoring him didn't work. Waiting till the last minute didn't work. But I also think what didn't work is having an electorate that's comprised only of Republican primary goers. And so I do think there are a number of ads that anti-Trump PACs ran that will ultimately be successful in a general election because the audience we're talking to is different.
Like what? Like which are ones that stood out to you as like potentially effective to a general election?
Sure. Well, I think the ads in particular talking about his comments around women, the comments around prisoners of war. I think those were 2 pretty powerful ads, among others. And one of the great things that the anti-Trump forces did for us is give us an opportunity to test a lot of those ads in our own ad testing. So we are thankful not only for the money spent, but for them
the lessons learned
helping us as we get ready for the general.
Is it true that you're eventually going to run ads showing American workers who felt or were, in their view, hurt by Donald Trump's economic business?
Well, I think there's no question we are going to show a host of people that have been either hurt by Donald Trump or would be hurt by his policies. I mean, this is a guy who attacks Hillary on trade, but brags about hiring workers in Bangladesh and China. So I think you can expect us to focus on his business record. I think you can expect us to focus on his temperament and character, and I think you can expect us to focus on how he approaches national security and foreign policy.
Do you believe that if your early advertising is effective, you can basically eliminate any chance he could win?
No, I think we're going to have to advertise through the end. I mean, I think one of the things that the Republican primary did teach us in the affirmative is that Donald Trump knows no boundaries. He is not a conventional candidate. He does not wage a conventional campaign. And I think that will require us to be on our toes all the way through Election Day, and not just to do it on television. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we are investing $40 million online, to make sure we're communicating not just with persuadable voters like most super PACs do, but African Americans, Latinos, base Democratic voters, millennial voters. Unlike a lot of previous independent efforts, that's going to be a big part of our operation.
His lack of conventionality is already clearly on display, has been for months, but particularly in the context of a general election, he's now out reprising his attacks on President Clinton's personal life in a very loud way. What does your research tell you about the resonance of those kinds of attacks, if any? Yeah,
we haven't tested that, but what I can tell you is history is actually a pretty good guide of what happens when you decide to attack President Clinton's personal life. And I think you can look at the fact that 1998 was the only election in modern history where the incumbent president's party did not lose Senate seats. I think ultimately this is going to backfire. I don't think it will work. I think Mark's point earlier about it being built into the stock is appropriate. And I think that, was it? Oh, your point. But I also think the way Hillary is handling it is exactly the right way. The other thing we learned from the Republican primary is the way to beat Donald Trump is not to become him, is not to get in the mud constantly. And to try to lift the content of this election up, try to lift the tone up, and I think that's what Hillary's going to do successfully.
Do you have data that suggests television advertising is effective in a general election campaign?
Yes, sure. And I think not only that.
What's the evidence of that?
Well, I think there's been a number of studies done internal to the Analyst Institute and other tests that we've done in the Democratic Party that show the right combination of television and digital can work together to communicate with voters. So I don't think a one-size-fits-all approach is going to work. I don't think investing 90% of your money in broadcast television, which is what anti-Trump forces did, works.
Your ratio is going to be what?
Probably somewhere around 60-40.
In every case, this cycle and last cycle, with small exceptions, campaigns looked at the performance of their super PAC by the end of that campaign and said, they didn't do what we wanted. They weren't running the right stuff. They weren't running in the right places. Are you going to avoid that, and how?
Well, I think 2012 is a great example of a super PAC doing really great work. I mean, the work that Priorities did very early on to define the race against Mitt Romney.
Obama people complained about it nonstop.
But at the end of the day, the ad was the top testing ad, I think, of the entire cycle. And so our job, first, is to do no harm. But secondly, our job is to tell the truth about Donald Trump, to compare that to Hillary's record, and we feel pretty confident that we have a path forward on how to do that.
So $91 million of reserved airtime, right? A second ago, you talked about uplifting the tone of the campaign. Yeah. Roughly what percentage of that 91 million will be spent on positive ads as opposed to negative ads?
I don't know if we have an exact percentage yet. I think we're still pretty early.
Roughly.
Maybe a quarter, a third.
On positive.
Yeah.
So 3/4 negative.
And I think a lot of the work that the Clinton campaign itself will do will be positive, and it will aggregate itself out in a certain way.
Right, but you don't make any pretenses to the notion that the 3/4 that you're going to spend on negative, that's going to be uplifting the tone of the campaign, right?
No, nor do I think it's the same thing for Donald Trump to be talking about what he's talking about over the last couple of days, and for us to be talking about his record. I mean, I do think it is okay for us to contrast records, to tell the truth about our opponent.
So you'll never advertise about his divorce, for instance?
No.
Nothing like that?
No.
What about his bankruptcies? Is that fair game?
I think we'll take a look at his whole business record. But in terms of personal life, that's just not something we're going to do. And frankly, I don't think it would work.
Where do you think Secretary Clinton is, of the potential Trump attacks against Secretary Clinton? I know you're not going to answer this probably, but where do you think she's most vulnerable? What do you think you most have to protect?
Sure. Well, I do think that there is a misconception about her record on trade. The fact of the matter is, when she was in the Senate, she voted against trade agreements that she thought were unfair. And so I think you'll see us take that on pretty directly. But I think the one thing we've learned from the primary and what we've learned over the last 5 days is you never know what he's going to say. And so our job is to be as prepared as we can to take him on in any particular instance. And that's why not only will we be up on June 8th, as previously reported, but we're actually going to go on the air earlier.
All right, Guy Cecil, thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure, a pure pleasure. Up next, we examine Donald J. Trump billionaire's media playbook with Jim Rutenberg, the New York Times' political media sportscaster. And if you happen to be watching us in Washington, D.C., you can also listen to us on the radio at Bloomberg 99.1 FM. We'll be right back.
Our next guest lives in a very fancy glass house at the intersection of Mainstream Media Drive and Media Criticism Boulevard. His latest column takes the media to task for getting way too much wrong about Donald Trump's candidacy. Jim Rutenberg of the New York Times, thank you for joining us, fella.
I like that glass house analogy.
Yeah, you like it?
It is, yes.
So the Times was as skeptical of Trump's candidacy on the news side as really almost any other major news organization in the country. Has there been soul searching at the paper and going back and looked at some of the headlines and some of the stories that said Trump in trouble, Trump in peril?
There is always soul searching at the New York Times, Mark. I can't. I'm not technically on the political team, but I believe so. I think there's always like a kind of.
Have you talked to your colleagues in the cafeteria?
Do they pull their forelocks?
I'm not allowed in the cafeteria under this new job. But I think, of course, there's some, always an examining of what we do. And I think you saw a change in the way we were covering Trump, kind of where suddenly, we had David Sanger come in a few weeks ago and start doing with other members of the political team and doing really good driving policy pieces. I think that we, among everybody else, were maybe a little late on doing some of that with Trump, but I think we had good company. I mean, I know we did.
Do you expect that, we were talking earlier on the show about the notion of the possibility that some people who, having been really wrong in the first part of the campaign, now may overcompensate and be doing, not necessarily sucking up to Trump, but sort of second guessing themselves so much from before when they didn't take him seriously that they'll now overrate his chances that when he does something strategically or tactically be like, oh, that must be brilliant because it must have worked before.
Definitely, because that's what we do, right? And that we in the media, we do it. Like we react to what we screwed up on the last time around. So, and I think there's real peril. That said, this campaign has been so hard to kind of surf that how can you not? I mean, I think it's going to require a little bit of testing where we need to be on this story.
Maybe asking for the obvious, but what are the tough aspects now of covering Trump going forward? What are the particular challenges covering him?
I think that some of the hardest things are going to be, checking all of our own assumptions, right? We're all talking about here's the map, and this is what we always know to expect of the map. I'm in the great position now where I get to sit in my chair and judge the coverage, which is not that comfortable for me to do because I know this is really hard. But so I don't know what you do, but you can't assume that anything is what it's always been. Just because it was thus. So far, we've learned that that's a horrible guide. Secondarily, and I think people are talking about this a lot right now, is Donald Trump knows how to fill the airtime. He knows how to fill it with his agenda. He's compelling. He knows how to make all of us kind of sit, and voters too, at the edge of their seats. How do you balance that against kind of the real elements in the race? I don't see Hillary Clinton kind of being the same kind of candidate. I assume that she'll have to push herself a little bit more to be out there, but that's going to be really hard.
What about this issue of his lack of specificity? Is that a particular challenge for him?
I think it's a big challenge, but a challenge for him or a challenge
for the press covering him?
I think so, but that should become less so because once we get past, and you tell me, but I think once you get past what's happening in this race, what's happening in that race, this is going to happen, it is time to say, okay, plan to deport 11 million immigrants. What does that look like? We should talk about that a lot. Hillary Clinton, okay, ISIS, Middle East, you were, allegedly very hawkish on war issues and foreign policy. What's that going to look like? I think we have some time to kind of do it right.
I'm going to give you an opportunity to exercise one of the great prerogatives of your job, positive, pleasant prerogatives, which is who's covered Trump well?
I think individual reporters at every organization have covered him well, and I'm not saying that as a cop-out. For instance, I mentioned a couple stories that we did. I think the Washington Post has done a very nice job, and there was a story by the byline I'm remembering on it is Costa's, but I think there was a second byline when he came out of the gate. And, a lot of reporters were like, wait a minute, how dare they put this on the front page? Donald Trump's not serious. I think they've been vindicated nicely. But I think every organization has had its bright spots. It's what is the collective news coverage said, and I think collectively the news coverage missed it.
I should say we've had bright spots here too, but there were people here who didn't even want to cover him when he looked like he was getting in the race. So every news organization's had its bright spots and less bright.
And how can and somebody raised this over the weekend. I, in 2011, wrote, Donald Trump, give me a break. I'm very skeptical. Because how could you not be skeptical? But at the same time, we were all talking to people in the Tea Party wing and going to events, and on the ground, you were hearing people saying, I'm not going along with what this establishment is telling me. You just heard that from voters. So there was a predicate being set that maybe some of us were missing.
Do you have a sense of what Trump's relationship with Fox is like now?
I gather that relationship is among the most complicated relationships.
There's mother-daughter, landlord-tenant, Trump, Fox. Those are the big three of complexity.
I bet it's definitely improved from the days of statements saying that he has a sick obsession with one of their main stars. And
you think that was the high point?
I think that was not a great moment for anyone. But I think that he's going to be, I know he's going to be on prime time on Fox with Megyn Kelly a week from today, I believe. So that would tell you right there that rift has been, taken care of. But there's a long way to go, and there's a lot of time for fighting.
Cutting away from news coverage just to show Trump events, pro or con, just good or bad?
To show Trump events?
Just to show events, just cutting away live events.
I think that there has to be a lot more discretion. Again, it's compelling TV.
Yep. All right, Jim Rutenberg, New York Times, thank you, fella. Jeff Daniels, the actor, joins us when we come back.
Our next guest is a proud resident of neither the East nor the West Coast, who lives in Michigan, which gives him a lot of street cred as a real American around these parts. And he's just been nominated for a Tony, which gives him a lot of street cred on an actual street known as Broadway. He's the star of the dark, provocative, and complicated play Blackbird at the Belasco Theater. Jeff Daniels, thank you for joining this show once again. You did this show some years ago. Mm-hmm. It's dark, it's complicated, and controversial. It nearly killed you then, and yet you're doing it again. Why?
A couple of reasons. One, it's Broadway. That's anytime you're asked to star in something on Broadway, it doesn't happen every day. So you got to take it seriously. The fact that it's controversial, the subject matter, it's about child abuse. It's a tough sell on Broadway. I like the commercial risk. But personally, I just didn't think I had done it right. I didn't go far enough before. I held back. And then in looking at it again, and with Joe Mantello, the director, he said, let's just reimagine it. Let's go darker and deeper. And so it's kind of like doing it, it's a new thing, a new attack on it.
And you play the abuser, which is part of the key element of here, why it's dark and difficult for you.
Yeah, when I was 40, it starts with a conference room of any business, and I'm dragging Michelle Williams down the hallway, throw her in the room. This is how it starts. Throw her in the room. What do you want? Why are you here? She's playing a woman who's 27 years old, and she sits down in my place of work and says, let's talk about when you abused me when I was 12. And she ain't leaving.
So it's the feel-good play of the season.
There are a couple songs. Yeah. I dance a little bit later, and then it's unlike any other play because we start where some plays climax. We come in the room in round number 9 of a 10-round fight. We're there already, and we stay there for the 90 minutes.
So you can get a good feel of how the audience is reacting. How do audiences react to this?
Since we opened and they start to understand what the subject matter is and they've heard from their friends, be ready. They come in bracing themselves. You can feel them just that. And Broadway, especially drama, the audience is so smart. These are some of the smartest theater goers in the world. And to hold them and to hang on to them so that several times during the show, it's dead silent. Dead silent. I've had friends say it's like we're afraid to breathe. It's suffocating because it just gets worse and worse.
Is your goal to do your performance the same every time or to alter it?
It changes every time, but it has to start here. You can't ease into it. A lot of plays come in with 2 or 3 scenes where we're all fun and nice, easy, and then it starts to we come in dramatic and at a high level. And so you want to get on top of that horse and ride that same horse. You may do this and this and this and this and this when you're doing it to keep it alive, but you got to get on that thing at a gallop.
I want to ask you about a topic that is almost as dark and almost as controversial as this topic of Blackbird, which is the United States presidential election. When I came out and visited you in Michigan last year, we talked about the presidential campaign a little bit, and I want to play this sound, and I want to hear catch what you had to say about where you thought we'd end up, and then talk about where we actually are.
I think it's the best this system is allowing us to do, because we branded a Clinton and we branded a Jeb Bush. If it's not Jeb and Hillary come election time, I'd be very surprised, just because that's what the brands are. And maybe it won't be Jeb. I don't know. It doesn't seem like Hillary's got anybody that's going to challenge her.
So kind of missed the mark.
It's like 58%, right?
So on both fronts. Right?
I might have swung and missed there.
Talk about what Trump says, how Trump has impressed you as a performer, because Trump is obviously the big surprise, the big thing you missed.
He's not impressed me as a performer. As someone who's in the entertainment business, I see him as a manipulator. I think he's done a masterful job of taking how we market a president, which is, I guess, I mean, you guys know about how long that's been going on, but it just seems to be, especially with cable news now and with social media even more so. As someone said, it's a Kardashian world.
So you're not feeling great about Trump. How do you feel about Trump supporters?
I think I agree with the fact that they were betrayed. They were betrayed by the Republican Party. That, you know, maybe it goes back further, but Karl Rove and company, you know, grabbed them and promised them things, and it didn't happen, and they're disaffected. But you know, that's also, it's so, I mean, look at anything that Trump's done. It plays into hatred. It plays into what's the worst possible thing we can create, and then fan that flame. And that's why you've got racism and bigotry and make America, the hat should say make America white again. That's what it should say. That's what it should say. And he knows that. He's playing to that. Whether he can take it all the way to November or not, you know, you want to say no, but where is he tripped up yet? But, you know, I look at the stats and hope to hell everyone who doesn't want him to be president shows up and votes.
Bernie Sanders won your home state of Michigan against Hillary Clinton in the primary. What do you think about Sanders and the Sanders movement?
I love Bernie. I love the ideas that he's got. To me, it's like somebody who went to Woodstock who now is running for president. And it's all those ideals, and that let's just make the world a great place and legalize this and free health care and free college and going for all of that. Great ideas. But that thing called Congress, you know, is a problem. And I just, it's not just the president of the United States, it's the president of the world. And like Hillary or not, and I do, she's got international street cred, and it's a dangerous world. And I like that she's been around it several times, certainly as Secretary of State, and her whole history, and the fact that, again, like him or not, Bill Clinton is available as a sounding board. Just internationally, I feel safer that way.
I got to ask you one last quick question. This election, we got 4 movie titles of your movies, all right? You ready? Which one applies better for this election? Good Night and Good Luck, Something Wild, Dumb and Dumber, or The Squid and the Whale?
Oh, God.
They're all very evocative.
If Trump wins, it's good night and good luck.
Okay. Really awesome. Jeff Daniels, thank you so much. Everybody, go see Blackbird. As Mark said, feel-good play of the year at the Belasco Theater here in New York City. We'll be right back.
And we leave you with a little news. Marco Rubio posted on Facebook this: he does not want to be Donald Trump's running mate. Rubio says he's got reservations about Trump's campaign, and he's got concerns about Trump's policies that remain unchanged. What do you think?
No little Marco on the ticket.
No Trump Rubio.
And, you know, Trump picked up a lot of good things, but he didn't pick up this today. That's bad for him. Lots more on BloombergPolitics.com about everything about this race. Coming up on Bloomberg West, Emily Chang going to Boston and diving into the city's startup scene with the co-founder of Spark Capital. Thank you for watching. And until tomorrow, from Mark and me, we say to you, sayonara.
Oh, yes.